So we are here today with Robert Patino, who is seeking the Ward 10 seat on the Springfield City Council in the April 2nd election. We appreciate you being here today and invite you to start by providing an opening statement that introduces voters to who you are and why you're seeking this office.
Thank you. My name's Rob Patino. Was born and raised here in Springfield, Illinois. Left for a couple years to get an education and do some work. I've come back, been back in Springfield for about almost 18 years now, and I'm running for this office because I think the voters of Ward 10 deserve a choice. I am running because I believe I'm the best qualified candidate in the Ward 10 race. I have an engineering background. I have legal training and am a registered patent attorney. I have a lot of experience with working with industry representatives, with business development and small companies with startup company formations. I have a lot of ideas that I think that can benefit the city, that might benefit from my perspective and my experiences. And as far as Ward 10 goes, I appreciate a lot of the concerns that a lot of those constituents have related to higher taxes, road improvements out there. Driving on some roads like Lenhart are just borderline dangerous in the wintertime. And I've got an interest to advocate for those interests related to Ward 10. So that's why I'm running.
You did say you thought you were the best candidate for this race, and you're facing an incumbent for the seat, so why challenge him?
Well, he has got a lot of special interest money, and whether those be from developers or different labor unions, I do not have those special interest monies that may influence my vote, so I believe I can come from a very objective perspective. And again, with my background in engineering and as an attorney, I believe I have a lot more to offer to the constituents of Ward 10.
Okay. You mentioned roads. What do you feel are the pressing issues facing Ward 10, and how would you work to address them?
Well, so in talking to the constituents that when I've walked the ward, a lot of them there's seems to be a bit of a gap with communication, and not saying that. The constituents that I've talked to believe that communication could be better as far as things that might be important to the ward. So, there's things that can be done through social media and other venues that could provide a better communication to the constituents. As far as the roads, I mean, a lot of them are small old roads that just don't have any shoulder, and if there's a bit of snow, and I've lived out there for over 10 years, you basically feel like you're going to be going into the ditch anytime you're out there. So those are interests that the constituents have communicated to me that they want to see improved.
So as that area continues to develop, and a speculation is that it will, what kind of things could the city do? Could you do as an alderman to assure that those kind of road issues are really taken care of either before subdivisions are developed or after? Is there some thoughts along those lines?
Well, I think that before new development gets made, the roads should be taken care of. It's a chicken or the egg thing, and I believe, I guess, in the chicken more than the egg, where I think that the roads and the infrastructure needs to be there to support that improvement. And there continues to be more and more development out there without the improved infrastructure, so that's a problem. It's a matter of advocating for that. And, if you look at the incumbent, he gets special interest money from developers, and so he seems, from my perspective, to favor those contracts. So, I'm here to give that objective perspective.
I'm curious, as a resident of the ward, the biggest construction project out there recently has been the roundabout at Isles and Archer Elevator. would that have been your top priority?
I don't think it would have been. I mean, it consumed a lot of time, a lot of money, and it's a nice roundabout, don't get me wrong. Some of the constituents I've talked to complained about the rerouting of everything and the lack of communication that went with that. But no, I would have put funding, I would have advocated more for maybe Lenhart Road or Isles, something that needs better roads before that roundabout got constructed.
Looking at citywide issues now, we would say one of the pressing issues facing our town is homelessness. What roadblocks do you see in addressing homelessness, and how would you work to solve it if a member of council?
I'm not familiar with the roadblocks that are there in addressing homelessness. You'll have to expand on that.
Just that the problem grows without, if the problem continues to grow or to not be addressed, arguably there's something impeding that. So, basically, how would you address homelessness here in our city?
Yeah, I think so. Funding's a real issue when it comes to homelessness. One of the things that I thought was pretty clever back in the days was when Sam Canman had advocated for the rounding up with the CWLP bills, which I've participated in. And I think additional efforts along those lines could perhaps provide more funding for the homelessness issues in the city, where it's more of an elective manner than it is a mandatory funding thing. But I think that provides more resources for the homeless to get access, and not only to shelters, but to hopefully getting back on their feet and getting the resources they need to look for jobs and all of that.
What type of resources are you referring to? I mean, financial, job training?
Yeah, so I mean, some of it could be just access to computers, and you need somebody there to help train, because most people don't even know how to draft a resume or fill out a job application, and just having personnel, volunteers on staff that can help with that sort of issue.
What do you think of the recent initiative the police department started with the homeless outreach officer?
I think I saw that in the paper the other day with that. I think that's a great idea. I think that kind of outreach is very important. There's a lot of reasons for homelessness, and I think that having somebody on the ground that can understand and communicate back, that person would probably have some really good ideas on innovative ways to kind of address the issues.
One of the other issues we as an edit board feel needs to be addressed here in the city is the need for economic development. So how would you, or how should the city go about attracting business to Springfield?
So I think economic development is one of my strengths that I bring to this possible position. I just won an I-6 Challenge grant as a co-principal investigator from the Southern Illinois University system, where I work with the University of Missouri system, which will help bring research dollars and attract jobs to the area. But beyond that, so there's two components to economic development. There's nurturing and incubating what you have here, and then there's attracting jobs. The easiest way to bring in more jobs is to attract a company and have the infrastructure ready, and maybe they can either occupy a vacant building or relocate, but the space needs to be available for them to do that, and that's where you get your big job numbers, 200 to 500 jobs, if you can get someone to relocate here. So just having those sites available. The problem is that I see is you get a lot of people that say, yeah, we want this, but not in my backyard. So there's going to have to be some balance there, and making sure that those spots are readily identified. The chamber does a pretty good job in doing that kind of sourcing, I would say. Now, as far as incubating jobs, I think there's a number of initiatives that the city could take and support. I know they recently supported the Land and Lincoln Economic Development Corporation, but to my knowledge, the other municipalities have not chipped in. And this is where I think you could leverage some economic development agency grant applications to get some matching dollars to be more competitive and get some outside dollars that could support some of that. Furthermore, if you want to incubate some startup companies here in Springfield, because investment in the area for startup companies is horrific. I mean, in the Midwest, and I was just talking to some folks in St. Louis, they identify that investors in the Midwest are too conservative. They just don't invest in startup companies. So maybe one example is to use something like that homeless shelter example, where, or not shelter, but money for the homeless. You have something, a possible proposal would be, again, maybe CWLP customers could optionally buy into an investment fund that the city could then leverage for startup companies, and then they could get access to a capital. Because the two things you need to have a vibrant startup community, you need ideas and you need capital, and capital is sorely lacking.
So could you say that again, that Midwesterners are reluctant to invest in startups?
They're
The Midwest investors.
Midwest investors, it's not that they do an extraordinary amount of due diligence. They scrub their startup companies like no other, and that's why a lot of startup companies end up going to the East Coast and the West Coast that are much more flush with cash, and they don't do the, I'm not saying due diligence isn't needed,
right.
but sometimes they scrub these companies to death where they want very low risk with very high return, and that just doesn't exist. So oftentimes what makes a lot of people attracted for investors in the Midwest are maybe investing in a capital project or something that that is a safe investment, I will say.
So other than, creating a investment fund like you described, what's the city council role in all this? How do you see the city council best helping?
Well, you
this overall
champion that, and so you've got to get that on there to make sure that that gets made available. And then there's a communication aspect that the city council can do to communicate the opportunity and encourage people to invest. The other thing is that you're going to have to set up some structure around that about who then would be eligible to apply for such a grant, and you'd probably need to pull in some people from the community as well to make sure that that gets properly reviewed, and whoever wins the grant, they can stand behind that.
You brought up the Land of Lincoln Economic Development Corporation. How do you think they're doing so far? I know they're in their infancy, they're just started, but what's your impression? Well,
I think an action like that was sorely needed. So I'm very supportive of that. I do struggle a little bit to appreciate the difference between their mission and the Q5 mission that was launched a while ago. But they're bringing in, I met Eric, and he's got a fresh perspective, and I've got a lot of confidence that he's going to bring in some good ideas. I believe they're going to first go after the low-hanging fruit, whatever that might be, to make sure that they're producing some deliverables. But beyond that, I expect that they'll be championing policies and other things that will start shifting the ground a little bit to where Springfield can be a game changer, like in Austin or something like that. I mean, that's pretty aspirational, but.
So it sounds like you're saying you do support the city contributing funding and would want to see that continue.
Absolutely, but I think you can actually add a bit more of a carrot with the whole funding issue, where, if certain milestones are met, maybe a little bit of a bonus gets added in there, or something, maybe a stick where if certain metrics aren't met, a little bit of funding is lost. But I think that initiative definitely needs to be supported.
And the city has its own economic development department too. What's your impression of it?
I don't know much about it, to be honest with you. I have some assumptions about their operations, but if I gave an opinion on that, I would risk being wrong on that without being better informed.
The council the last couple years has approved some tax increases as the times were tight financially. I know you weren't on the council then, but if you were, how do you think you would have voted for those measures, like the sales tax increase, the hotel motel, the telecom, the natural gas taxes?
Yeah, I mean, one thing I am is pretty fiscally conservative, I believe, but you still got to pay your bills. So if the revenue is not there to support those, then you've got to find those sources. So, yeah, I'm for better or worse, I think you have to support some kind of additional revenue rise. I'm assuming the city had done everything that they could to identify the best ways to raise that revenue. And if I was sitting on the council and I looked at all those options and that was what was presented to me, I may have supported that.
Fiscally, the city's doing a little better. There's not necessarily the anxiety this budget season as there were the previous 2 years. But if you were on council and every year you have to go through the budget season, how would you work to keep the city's finances stable?
How would I work to keep the city's finances stable?
Yeah, I mean, like, what would your priorities be when you're looking at the budget every year to what you would and would not want to fund?
Well, I think the biggest chunk of funding that is taken from the budget every year is personnel funding. So I think what you have to do is, and I know this has probably been beaten to death, but look at efficiencies, and as spots become vacant due to retirement or attrition, you need to really assess whether or not those really need to be filled and whether or not they can be merged with another role so that those efficiencies can be taken place. Because, salary and pension costs and all of that are what's going to, if you can start reining in some of those costs, and I know that the employment numbers for the city have been going down, yes. So it's going in the right direction. I think they've leveled off a little bit lately, but I think that's where you really need to, because you need infrastructure and some other things that probably should be taking priority over just personnel, assuming that some of those duties can be consolidated in some capacity.
You brought up pensions. That is consuming an ever larger share of the city's finances. It, in fact, takes up now all of the city's share of property taxes that it levies, and it's certainly not a unique problem. Most municipalities struggle with their fire and police pensions, and they're limited in some ways by the legislature as what they could do to address it. But what type of pension reforms would you like to see happen?
Well, obviously a lot of that's constitutionally mandated, so there's not a whole lot that we can do. But I think I'm a big advocate for like a 401k type of pension program. And in fact, I work for the university, and I've enrolled in their self-managed plan just because I didn't trust the state so much.
Okay.
And
CSRS offers. That's right. I forgot CSRS offers. Okay.
But that's also a very transportable type of retirement thing, and it also doesn't obligate the city beyond its capacities. I think the way the traditional pensions were set up, that you got some mandatory pay increases, and then when the cost of when the COLA isn't increasing like it should, but yet you're still giving people that pension increase, it's just going to keep eating away at that. So that, if I had a wish list, that is where I would go. But you're awfully constrained with.
Yeah. There is a proposal out there to merge all of the police and fire pension funds throughout the state into one fund, kind of like an IMRF type thing. Would you be in favor of that?
I don't know.
Okay.
I just have to see what the benefits of that would be.
Fair enough.
Another topic that's been talked a lot about at the city level in the past year is tourism. And, do you think the city is leveraging its attractions and amenities in the best way that it could? And if not, what could be done better?
Do I think the city is leveraging?
Like, I mean, we have Lincoln, we have the Dana Thomas House, you have Route 66. Are we using those, what we have here, to the best of our ability?
Yeah, I think we do a pretty good job. I remember going to the museum, and you get nice maps of the downtown areas and places that are in walking distance and things like that. And I think with the addition of the Children's Museum that I just went to this last weekend, it just adds more of a whole full weekend kind of fill, and something that you can take your children with. One thing that I was a little surprised was because I took my daughter to the old state capitol, and they had these Civil War supporters, and they were helping make Valentine cards, but I had no idea they were there. But it was a pleasant surprise because then we could participate and make that. So I suppose there are some gaps where some things might be communicated better, but I think overall we do a pretty good job.
Okay. One of the hot topics in our city the last couple of years is what should go on the Y block.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, I have some strong opinions about that. I know at least what I've read in the paper is about a business incubator there, and I'm someone who deals a lot with business incubators with my job, and I visited a number of them, and I just don't think it's a right location for a business incubator. You need to be in a place close to where some innovation is happening, and that is not. I mean, you're kind of close to downtown where there's a lot of service providers, but in my opinion, I think the medical district makes a lot of sense for a business incubator because you've got a lot more scientists, you've got a lot more physicians and nurses and whatnot that deal with things. What should go there? I think it would be nice to definitely have some kind of park or recreational area. Would love to see maybe an ice skating / roller skating ring or something like that that could be used. But it's a beautiful space, and I think it definitely needs to be multi-purposed out.
One of our state senators, Andy Minar, has proposed a university presence there. Would you be interested in that at all?
If it were the right blend with I think what it could be, then maybe. I just have to see that proposal. Anytime you are able to bring students into an area, I just think there's a lot more youth that gets brought in, and it just brings a lot more vibrancy that was missing, that is missing in the downtown area.
I want to swing back for a minute. You had mentioned a couple of times your concern about campaign contributions and interest groups supporting candidates. Have you accepted campaign contributions from different groups? Are there groups that you would refuse contributions?
I've not accepted campaign contributions from anybody. I'm almost they're all small donations. I think one is from a friend who was a close friend, but I'm self-funded. So it's the short answer is no. And if I found out that someone donated to me that I couldn't somehow, I would donate it to a cause that I thought was important or somehow benefited the city. This campaign that I'm running for.
So these campaign contributions aren't so much illegal, are they, as...
They're not, but there's an expectation. I mean, you've seen some these contributors that sit there, and if you don't vote their way or support them unconditionally, they'll go out and find another candidate to support. And that is what it is. This is the city of Springfield. This isn't. I suppose if it were a larger office where you might need some more financing, I think it might be acceptable to accept some funding from somebody a cause that was important to you. But at the city level, I don't think that should be. I'm not saying it's not illegal, like you said, and if someone wants to accept that, that's fine. But the optics to me are just ugly.
Yeah. So what would you expect to spend in your campaign? What kind of ballpark number?
Ballpark, I think probably around $3,000, maybe between $2,500 to $3,500. It depends if I do a second mailer, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
So.
Okay.
One of our other issues that's been discussed in the last year here is Capital Township, and if it should be merged. Do you think it should be merged, and if so, with the city or the county?
Well, I do think it should be merged. I'm all about efficiencies, and my bias would be towards the city. Just a lot of it is related to the boundary that the city shares with the township. But it may make sense if the mayor and the county can be agreeable. Maybe they split some of those services, because there are certain assessors that the county has, and it may make sense to put some of those in the county and some of those with the city. But I think the bulk of it should be with the city, if not all of it. Just my opinion.
Another thing that's been in the news lately, a recent series of articles in Governing Magazine focused on issues of race-based inequalities in Springfield and other Illinois cities. Did you have a chance to read that at all? And if so, what was your reaction?
Oh, I think I did. As far as like where the minorities are and things like that. I don't recall reading it in depth, but I do recall looking at that article. Yeah, it's a real challenge. The segregation, I think, is what you're referring to there. And I don't really. When I read that article, one of the things that I recall being a little disappointed was there wasn't really a suggestion on how that could be corrected. It's really up to the policymakers to try and come up with ideas, and maybe that requires a community effort to come together and figure out how some of that can be tackled. I went to Southeast High School. I know that there's, I don't want to say a disproportionate amount of minorities there, but there's more there than other schools around the area. Well, maybe not excluding Lamphere, but I think that distribution, I believe in diversity. I'm half Mexican myself, so I come from a mixed family, and that's something that would be important to me and should be supported.
Are there things you see that the city council or city government could be doing to improve the situation here in Springfield?
Yeah, I mean, if they want to take a leadership role, they probably need to bring together the community leaders that are in these areas and talk about these things and just have the conversation and see what needs to be done.
Within the past year, the city council, after quite a bit of discussion, decided against adopting a welcoming city resolution. Your thoughts about that? You recall that?
I don't. What was the significance of the welcoming city? Was this just was there something behind that?
Well, I mean, just to send a message that it wasn't.
Kind of more symbolic.
Yeah, more symbolic. It wasn't so much, it didn't make the city a sanctuary city or anything like that, but just a message that.
I see. Okay.
Folks are welcome.
Yeah. I don't know what the significance of that might have been. If it was symbolic, is that to suggest that immigrants might be welcomed here and that sort of thing?
Right.
Yes.
I would probably support us being more accepting of immigrants and that sort of thing. I don't think we should be. Well, I'll just leave it at that.
Okay. Right, We thank you for meeting with us today, Robert, and invite you to give a brief closing statement as to why voters should choose you to prevail on Election Day.
I believe voters should vote for me on Election Day because I bring an unbiased perspective coming into City Council. I've got a lot of connections with the business community, both large companies and small companies here in the area. I've got the engineering background, I've got the legal aptitude to be an effective councilman, and I'm very familiar with the issues that are important to the folks in Ward 10. So that being said, if you need to learn anything more, go to runwithrob.com, and hope to see you on April 2nd. Thank you.